Hello, I'm Jim Eskin, and on behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my privilege to welcome you to our 69th Nonprofit Empowerment Webinar. This one is Tell Stories Like a Pro, and so we have turned to the best person I know about storytelling on the planet. I'm going to introduce him in a moment, but to tell you the challenge that nonprofits face. It is estimated that the average American receives 8 to 10,000 messages a day. It's a communications tower of Babel. And a lot of those are facts and figures. And we have learned that it's stories. You all in nonprofit land have wonderful stories. Chancellor and I have talked. We have 4 learning objectives. Number one, we want to talk about what makes a good story. We want to know how you know if it fits your audience. And we want to know if it fits your nonprofit. And get your questions ready, again, for the best storyteller I know. I once heard, Chancellor, that you're not very good at holding a job, but over his distinguished career, he's been an attorney, a state senator, a U.S. congressman, a railroad commissioner, and that wasn't enough. He went into higher education and was chancellor for 8 years at Texas Tech University and continues as their chancellor emeritus. I have one of your alum. Shay, could you say what class were you with?
Oh, I think I saw him speak in his chancellor course in 2010.
Oh, it's very recent. Okay, and you know, the chancellor's done so many things, but if I was to summarize the themes, it's this: service, leadership, and excellence. And we want to thank the chancellor. All he's done his whole life is make our state better, make our country better, make communities stronger. And by the way, not many of us have been portrayed in movies. And Chancellor, I got a question for you. In the 2008 movie W, produced by Oliver Stone, they recruited an actor named Paul Ray to play you. Did I understand your family was disappointed that they should have cast someone better looking like George Clooney?
Yeah, they thought it should have been George Clooney. Paul Ray portrayed me as a guy that wore gold necklaces, which I've never worn. It was kind of a big old fat guy, and you know, they didn't call us, and they didn't ask for our information or consulting as far as that movie was concerned. I've never seen it, but a lot of people have gotten chuckles, and every once in a while I get a call from somebody that's seen it.
Hey, let's talk about your latest venture. I listened to some of the episodes last night, couldn't stop laughing. Was it earlier this year that you introduced your podcast project? It's called The Best Storyteller in Texas. Can you give us a little context of how, and I want to know how you choose those wonderful stories.
Well, first of all, how I got in the business of storytelling. Always been a pretty good storyteller, and a lot of people have encouraged me to write a book, and I was talking to Skip Hollingsworth, the feature writer for Texas Monthly, and he said, I think a book would be great, but something to be better is podcast. And he encouraged me. And I talked to Pete Thamel, who was a college sports editor of the New York Times and now with Yahoo, and he had the Yahoo coordinator for podcast call me, and I talked to him one night for about 2.5 hours. And then he helped me get a producer in Austin and an editor in San Francisco. And I talked to the CNN people, the lady, Courtney Coop, she's vice president for digital and podcast. And so I did some rough drafts, and they thought they had potential. And we've had right 30,000 hits in the month of August. And they say for a podcast, that's pretty good. And the 98.2% of the people that listen to my podcast listen to the whole thing. They don't just get on and get off. So we feel good about that. And I don't know that I'm going to beat Joe Rogan, but I'd like to get it where we've got advertisers now that are advertising and building their numbers up, and so it's kind of fun.
Well, congratulations. And my first question is, what is the license for a storyteller to exaggerate? For example, every time a guy catches a fish, every time he tells the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger. So what is the license that you as a storyteller have to kind of just spice it up a little?
I think I'm. Can you see me now?
Yeah. I don't know if we like it better, just sound and voice, but welcome. So we were talking,
Okay, can we actually have you get off your the phone and just stay on the computer?
Yeah, we've already turned that off.
Oh, perfect.
And so we're ready to go. And I don't know if it's got. Let's see can y'all see me waving,
yep, you're on.
or it just a still shot?
No,
Okay,
yeah.
so
We can see you. Everything looks
you
good.
had me waving
Yeah.
there.
Okay, we're gonna go. I was asking about, as a storyteller, how do you interpret your license to exaggerate in the spirit of everybody I know that caught a fish? Every time they tell the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger. So what is a storyteller's license to exaggerate?
Well, can y'all hear me okay? Jim, you were really breaking up.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, I hear you okay.
I may have to get back on my.
It sounds like we might be having a problem with your internet connection so far.
Michael, Chancellor, Alex, why don't we go back to the phone call only if we can't do it video?
I think he just dropped, so I'll get with him and try to get everything set up again.
Okay. Thank you for your patience to our audience. Who else is out there? This is some time to take care of that. Please come on. Can some other members of our audience come on camera?
It looks like I can see them rejoining.
Oh,
They just need to unmute. So
Okay.
Kent, if we can get you to unmute the phone, I can see your phone number in the participants list.
Okay. Hey, Jim,
yes.
I apologize. My iPad had problems, and I think I'm just going to stay with the phone.
Okay,
and,
that sounds
and I
good.
apologize.
No worry.
Okay, questions. I'm taking
Okay, I'm going to
questions.
start. Hey, first of all, you're Chancellor Emeritus of Texas Tech. Can you give us, I know you've surpassed the 40,000 in enrollment. Can you, number one, give us a little update on Texas Tech? And I imagine, is it going back to full-time in person? What's happening at Texas Tech?
Well, I took the job in 2006, and I set an objective. This is important for people that are on this call. I set an objective that's understandable and is attainable. Number one, we're going to grow. We were at 26,000, grow from 26,000 to 40,000 students by 2020, which we did. Number two, we were going to raise $1 billion which we raised $1,200,000,000. And number 3, we're going to substantially increase our research. Those are 3 goals that people can understand, and they don't have to sit around and say, well, I wonder what that means. If it fits in those goals, then do it. And if it doesn't, then don't do it. But if you're leading any organization, you have to have understandable goals. They need to be quick and to the point. And I think it's just important that's what we did. And things are going well at Texas Tech. We've got doing more research than we've ever done. And we have almost 41,000 students this year. And more students travel a further distance to go to Texas Tech than any university in the nation. It's a public university. Of the 41,000 students, 75% of them travel 280 miles or more to get to Texas Tech. So that a lot of people think it's a West Texas school. 1/3 of the student body comes from the Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth. 1/3.
Hey, we have mostly fundraisers on this line. You referred to the $1.2 billion capital campaign. Is it my understanding you finished that 18 months early?
We did finish it early, and we had we raised money until we got to the kickoff, and we'd had a $500 million campaign that took about 7 or 8 years, and so we wanted to try to do it in 5. And we did it less than that. And it was, you got to have some big gifts. I think it goes back to people that are listening. You got to believe in your product. Yeah. And I believed in the product. The product allowed me to get a college education, the first in my family to do so. And so, it was easy for me to sell something I believed in. And anytime you're dealing with someone that they know if you've got enthusiasm or not. We had a guy out in West Texas one time that ran for sheriff, and he'd go around and he'd say, you wouldn't want to vote for me for sheriff, would you? And the voters went, that's right, we wouldn't. He took a negative approach, and it caught up with him. But you have to have a great product, and you have to go see people. And Jim, you've heard me say this. Every visit is worth another 0.
I love it.
Paul Foster,
repeat that if you could. That's a wonderful strategy.
Every visit is worth another 0. Paul Foster in El Paso gave me $50 million, and I went to see him 7 times before I asked for any money. I told him I wanted to find out what he was interested in, and he was interested in the Health Science Center in El Paso, in the medical school, in which we now have a dental school, public health. And so that's what his interest was. And that allowed me to focus on that interest. I'll give an example. A guy named Bob Hurd from Tyler, Texas. And Bob, I'd see him at football games. He loved, Texas Tech football and basketball. Yeah. And I one time I went to see him, and I was talking about sports and everything. If he had interest, I said, I know you have you ever thought about funding? And he said, no, I'm not going to, because they make enough money through the TV rights and people buying tickets. And I said, what interests you if you were going to give us some money, or if you could tell somebody to give us, what would you do? He said, I'd put it in petroleum engineering, which he did, and I kept seeing him, and he later gave us $20 million, and we named the petroleum engineering department after him. And he's done a lot to help petroleum engineering in the state. And he died at 95, but when he was 93, he shot at 93 in golf, and was a heck of a guy. Yeah. Hey, we have lots of questions, but at this point, Michael Argent, our producer, could you tell our audience how they can either share questions by typing them in the chat space? The better way is to come on camera. Can you take a second to explain that?
Sure. So if you guys are listening, you have any questions, if you go ahead and type them in the chat below, I'll read them when we have a break. But what we would really prefer is that you turn on your camera and turn on your microphone, and then ask Jim the questions yourself. So those are the two options.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask everyone, however, the only time to type into the chat space, if you could type in your name, your nonprofit, and your location. I'll give you about 20 seconds to do that. Type in your name, the name of your nonprofit, and your location. Michael, you seeing anything?
I think we still got everyone typing.
Okay.
We
By the
got
way,
one, we got a few if you want me to read them now.
okay, and I'd like to know the cities too.
We've got Matt Reedy with decisions.org based in San Antonio and Miami.
Ah,
We've got Margot Armistead with the Salvation Army in Tallahassee.
okay.
Uh,
Welcome.
Stephen Engro from Lighthouse, Louisiana, I think is what it's called, in New Orleans. Shay Feeney with Client Engagements, M. Gale and Associates in Fort Worth.
Great company. Great company.
We've got Margie Hellshine. I hope I'm saying that
Yeah,
right.
Margie, and that's a new friend. Hey, Margie, do you have any question in particular before I go? I got about 103 questions for the Chancellor. Margie, do you have any question in particular you'd like to learn about storytelling?
Well, I've
Hi, Margie.
actually listened. Oh, let me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually listened to Kent's station one time and I loved it. I meant to
Yeah.
listen for 5 minutes, Kent, but I was on there a long time. Your stories are amazing. They're really captivating.
And
Thank you
know,
very much.
he's lucky your voice is so perfect. It is loud and strong and it just reeks of Texas. By the way, we have a mantra here, Chancellor. It's called Nonprofit Strong, and we'd like everybody to type in their chat space, Nonprofit Strong. And Chancellor, what are we?
I'm sorry you faded on me. What's the question?
Okay, I'm asking you, what are we?
What are
Nonprofit
we?
Strong. Yeah, we like to say we're Nonprofit Strong.
Well,
Okay, go ahead.
go ahead.
I have plenty of questions, so let's get at it. And anytime the audience has, we're going to put you first. If you have a question, we will go to it. I have my list and we're going to start picking up some time. First question, Chancellor, are great storytellers born or are they made?
You know, I think a combination of both. My dad was a good storyteller and I used to listen to him a lot. And I grew up telling stories and you know, I think some people have a natural talent for it, but I think that the more you work at it, the better off you'll be. And I found it's been very helpful to me as an administrator in higher education, as a lawyer. I always tried to tell stories to juries. A lot of lawyers in politics were not real practicing lawyers, and I was a practicing lawyer. I represented people as a court-appointed lawyer on 3 murder cases. I defended 3 people within the first 2.5 years out of school. And you learn pretty fast if you're the guy, the only one between them and life, or you know. And I'd try to tell stories. I had a story of a kid. It was a marijuana sale case when marijuana was a felony, and they were trying to give him 25 years in prison. And he was 18 years old. And I told the story, Johnny Rogers had won the Heisman Trophy on a Saturday. He is from Nebraska. And I told the jury in final argument, Johnny Rogers got in trouble when he was in the 11th grade.
Yeah.
And had they not given him a second chance, he wouldn't have won the Heisman Trophy. I'm not asking for the Heisman Trophy. I'm asking for a chance for my client.
Right.
And they gave him probation, which he was entitled to. So, you know, the story should always mix with what you're doing. You know, you mentioned somebody in Salvation Army. Salvation Army, they help, and I give to them. They help some people that just don't get anything.
Yeah.
And they're not going to ask somebody for 50 million. They're not going to have somebody do that, but they need some hundreds and 500s and thousands. And you look at the lives of somebody that works for the Salvation Army, that you help turn someone's life around, and you see them 3 years later and they have a job and they've gotten their confidence back. You've done a great service to society, and there won't be any rewards for you, but in your mind, you'll know you did a great job. And so I think that anytime the nonprofits that are doing a good job and trying to help people, there's a satisfaction there that you get where you don't get any other place when you actually help someone that is in need of help. We all want to help people, but you know, if you actually do it, it's like in basketball, scoring a basket, or, you know, in politics, passing some legislation. It's important.
Hey, let's talk. We have nonprofit leaders who want to learn how they can use the stories of their nonprofit to motivate gifts of time and money. Do you have a favorite story of how Texas Tech has changed lives?
Well, I've got lots of them. I had of the kids that applied at Texas Tech, I'd get a list of the kids that made 1,500 or more on the SAT, which 1,600 is perfect score. And I called a kid one time, and his teacher had encouraged him to go to college. No one in his family had ever been to college. His dad had a pretty good job, was a union employee, and that he was going to go to work for the union. And I called him. I'd call him on Sunday night. I'd set aside times to make 15 calls and invite them to come to Texas Tech and visit, and we'd pay their way. And this kid came out and he went to Texas Tech. And then he was in my class on leadership. And I got a letter from him, and it was after I had taken Chancellor Emeritus status. And it was the nicest letter. I still have it. And I've got a lot of those letters. But the kid said, you know, he didn't realize about college. It it opened doors. It changed his life. And he was going to Harvard Business School. You know, prior to that, he wasn't even going to go to college. And he graduated from Tech, and he got a job with Teach America. And he was teaching in areas where there's poverty and that there's, you know, schools are not up to par with some other schools, and where a lot of kids don't have much help at home. Well, he was doing a job that you know, I felt good about it because it had helped him help others, because I made that one phone call, and so it changed his life. And all of the people that are listening, I can guarantee you, there are people that you deal with that you change their life. You have that kind of impact. And I think it's so important that you realize that and you continue. When you have a bad day and you can't raise money and things are going bad, think back to that 1 or 2 or 10 that you really helped. And I think it gives encouragement moving forward.
You know, Kent, you've worn so many different hats and wore them well. I want to ask you about your congressional career, because you teamed up across the aisle with President Reagan in 1981 to get the largest tax cut in U.S. history approved. And I think, by the way, when you are the best storyteller in Texas, I guess that's the equivalent to being the best one on the planet. But Ronald Reagan was quite a storyteller. Do you have any favorite story about President Reagan?
He was great. When I was carrying his tax cut, he had me to Camp David one weekend. And I was talking to him, and you know, Camp David, I mean, is just unbelievable. And it had nine-hole golf course, but only 3 holes. You had 3 approaches to each hole. And it was just beautiful. And so I was talking to him, and I said, Mr. President, there's no doubt in my mind, you can't come up here every week. And there are times that you're not here. And lots of times, if you got a resort home and you don't have somebody there all the time, you know, that the insurance rates will go up. I don't want your insurance rates to go up. So every week you can't come up. I'll just come up for you. And he laughed, loved it. And he went in and got Nancy and said, Nancy, listen to what a good Samaritan we have here. And I told her he liked it. But Reagan was, you know, one of my favorite stories is when at the very first, when he was president, he was trying to they were trying to figure out what to do with the Soviets, or with the Soviet Union at that time. And they talked about détente, you know, the different theories. And Reagan said, how about we win and they lose? And everybody went, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And but he was succinct on his words. And I served in Congress at a time that 78 Democrats voted for Reagan's tax cut.
Wow.
And in this day and time, you couldn't do that. But it was a different time. You didn't have all the cable news. You didn't have CNN, Fox, and MSNBC out there trying to get somebody to say something sensational. And it's Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, one a liberal Democrat, one a conservative Republican. They got along well. And I saw them at the White House several times. They'd be exchanging Irish stories. But in this day and time, it's hard to sit down and, you know, when Reagan got real mad at one time at Tip O'Neill, and he said, I think the Speaker of the House is ill-advised. Well, you know, that's not too hard. In the night, they could sit down and work out the differences. But now, you know, I mean, if you call somebody a loon and they call you morbidly obese, it's hard to sit down that night and work out all the problems.
Yeah.
And but society with the internet is such a confrontational society that people can hide behind names. You know, a Diamond Jim. Well, I've always felt like that you ought to be able to say anything you want to on the internet, but you need to put your name and address and phone number. That cuts down on a lot of bullying. And one thing we have to watch for is the number of young kids that get bullied on the internet. And that's a problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah. Hey, let's move to the mechanics of telling stories. First of all, how do you fit a story to your audience?
Well, you got to read your audience. You got to read them well. If you don't, they'll kind of look at you. You know, if it doesn't fit, you'll know pretty quick. But if I'm telling a story about if I'm recruiting a student, I'm going to tell a story about Ed Whitaker, who was a Texas Tech graduate and CEO and chairman of the board of AT&T. And nobody in his family ever been to college. And that if I'm recruiting a student, I want to tell them that story. And I want them to know so they can identify with it. Any story I tell with any organization is going to have a reason behind it, and it's going to have a purpose. I'm not going to just tell a story for the heck of telling a story. And you also have to keep in mind to sometimes tell a story, add a little humor with it. Now, if you can't tell jokes or you don't tell funny stories, don't try to be funny. If you're not, some people can't, some people can. But I think being sincere about your subject matter is the most important thing. And people see that when you're telling stories or whatever.
And particularly in fundraising. Hey, let's go to what I call the no-nos. What would you say is absolutely off limits for nonprofits in storytelling?
Well, you don't want to tell something that's risque, that's sexual in nature, or any type of joke that would be making fun of any group. You know, the only group that you can make fun of is yourself.
Yeah.
And you can tell a joke about yourself and about some of the things that you've had go wrong. And I used to tell the story about when I was carrying Reagan's tax cut. I'd been on the Today Show and Good Morning America and Meet the Press, and I went to Denver City, Texas, small town west of Lubbock, to be in a parade. And I got there and found the parade marshal, and I said, where will I be in the parade? And he said, you'll be in front of the band from Plains. Plains, Texas is a small town, and behind the band from Denver City. And that's good news, because a lot of times in politics in West Texas, if you have not been voting the way they like, they'll put you behind the horses and make you walk and hope that you step the wrong direction. And but I told the guy, I said, well, where's my float or convertible? And he just looked at me and he said, no, just pull your car in there. And I said, well, who will drive me? He said, you drove it over here, didn't you? And so I drove my own car in the parade. It brings you back to humility.
Yeah.
And I can tell that's always get a good laugh. And the joke was on me. But one of my grandchildren one time said that their mother, my daughter, had told them that it's not funny unless the person you're telling about thinks it's funny. So I think we always keep that in mind.
Hey, here's another question that I know is on the minds of a lot of our audience. How long should the story be?
Short. Do not tell long stories. Congressman Charlie Wilson I served with, and there was another congressman from Texas that would try to tell stories, and they'd go on forever. And so one time Charlie told him, he said, hey, tell Hance that story and let him condense it and tell us to it. Don't tell long stories. You lose your audience.
Hey, be specific. Is it like 1 minute, 90 seconds? What do you call brief?
I'd say, the longest would probably be 2 minutes, 2.5. That would be unusual. Most stories you can tell pretty fast.
Yeah. And here's another one. Here's another question that keeps coming up. How often can you repeat a favorite story?
Every time you've got an audience. I've said that in politics, they're making 5 or 6 stops a day campaigning, and they've got a story that's working and that coincides with what they want to do. They're going to tell the same story and same speech everywhere.
Yeah. You alluded to this a little earlier, but when should a nonprofit leader feel comfortable trying their hand at humor?
I think you look at something, make it pretty quick. A story that you can identify with. I'd talk at Texas Tech groups and I'd say, I've been chancellor for about a week, and the professor came to see me. He said, I'm not getting paid enough. My office too small. My parking space too far away. And I said, Dr. Patterson, I wish I had 100 just like you. He said, why? And I said, because right now I've got 2,000 just like you. And that always got some laughs.
Yeah. What do you suggest to nonprofit leaders on rehearsing and practicing stories and presentations?
I would be to the point, and I wouldn't spend too much time on stories. I'd have 1 or 2, and when I got Paul Foster to give us $50 million, I had a lady that worked for me, and that she made applications and everything. And so she drafted a book, and I was going to give that book to the guy, to Paul Foster. And I looked at it, and it was very expensive. And in the front page of the book, it had, when you opened it, it had Paul Foster's granddad's picture at Texas Tech, first football team that played there in 1925. Well, when he opened it, saw his granddad's picture in a football uniform, and I mean it meant something to him.
Yeah.
And we got about halfway through that book, and Paul said, "Can I keep this book?" Yes, you can keep this book. So I think you're making a presentation. You need to know something. That after I left, we had a guy at Tech called a person in East Texas on the phone, had never been to see him, and asked for $25 million. And the guy knew me, and I was already retired, and he called me, and he was really hot about it. So, some guy called me on the phone, asked, and said, if I ask for $25 over the phone, that's one thing. But your big contributor, you need to spend some time with them. It's built on relationship.
Right. Hey, when is it okay to borrow someone else's story?
That theft of other people's stories happens all the time. I've done a few. I've had a lot of them. John Sharp, the Chancellor at A&M, stole one of my stories, and told it one time. Somebody came out and said, "You got that from Sharp?" And I said, "No, Sharp got it from me." There was a state senator named Buster Brown, and he was always stealing my stories. And I introduced him one time, and I said that if he tells you something funny, it's one of my stories. He steals my stories, and I may file theft on him. And so when he got up, he said, "As a former prosecutor and district attorney, I can assure you that you have to prove that the stolen item was of value." He didn't know he could prove that it was of value.
When is it okay to laugh at your own humor?
I think it's okay. Every once in a while somebody get carried away and really laugh, but you got to smile when you tell those, unless you're Rodney Dangerfield. And Rodney Dangerfield, he took a different approach and went from there.
For the larger organizations, what are the challenges in telling stories or a presentation that a staff member wrote for you?
I don't do speeches by staff. Never have. I think that most people in politics, they do speeches and staff works on everything. And if they've got a funny story for you to tell and you're that high up, do you think it's funny? And also have your wife or husband listen to it and see if they think it's funny. All that is important.
Asking for a gift in person, and big gifts should be asked for in person.
Absolutely. Unless, if it's small, you can do it over the phone.
Yeah.
But if
I'm talking about 6 or 7 figures.
Yeah, you've got to ask for it in person. And also, when I asked for big money, I never took anyone with me. And then later I might.
How come, by the way?
I think there's something about it. If you go in there with 4 or 5 people, it looks like you're trying to overplay and overpower them. And people, hey, the worst thing you can do is get somebody to give something and they don't like it. That's the worst thing you can do. And because they'll have buyer's remorse and you'll just have some problems with it.
Yeah, but I was saying, a gift solicitation for 6 or 7 figures can be a tense moment. How do you see the use of stories and humor in particular to lighten the occasion?
Well, I go back to Foster. I told him that when I was asking for money, that Paul, if you give this to the Health Science Center and the medical school, it will transform healthcare in New Mexico and Texas. You'll be the #1 medical center from Houston to LA.
Yeah.
And this will be huge. And you've made money here. This is where you've made your big money. And this would really be putting back in to the health care for everyone, especially the ones that can't afford it, but also for the research and everything.
Yeah.
It allowed us to go hire the two top immune deficiency disease researchers at Harvard and take them to El Paso. And, so you
go
got.
ahead. I have a lot more questions, but Michael, do we have anybody in the audience that has either typed in a question? Or, by the way, I'm going to pick on her. Margie Hellshine is the executive director of an organization called America Connected. They're headquartered in Boca Raton, so I bet they do a lot of golfing. Margie, do you have any questions for the Chancellor about storytelling? Unmute yourself.
Oh, well, what would you say is the biggest difference between when you worked? I mean, to me, it's like amazing, the days of Reagan and George Bush. I wish those were the days now.
Yeah.
What would you say
Yeah.
the biggest difference, what you think happened?
I think television changed it in two things. One was the networks, MSNBC and CNN for the liberals and Fox for the conservatives. And if you're a member of Congress, if you don't get much time unless you say sensational things. And the other thing is reality TV. You know,
Yeah.
Trump was a reality TV guy.
Yeah.
You know, and people, they like that. And instead of ratcheting it down, Pelosi ratcheted it up. And I'm just saying, but you know, you call somebody a loon, they call you morbid obese. It's
Right.
just hard to reach a
Yeah.
compromise. You know, that night you sit down and say, hey, I just kidding. I really don't think you're a loon, or, you know, it just doesn't, they don't compromise anymore. And there's so much pressure through social media not to compromise. The Madison papers, anybody that reads the Madison papers, they anticipated there was going to be compromise. And you know, that's part of the United States of America, that there's going to be give and take. But we've isolated people, and certain states have gotten isolated, and they're all blue or all red or whatever. And it makes it, when you think your opinion is the only opinion in the world, you're going to be making some mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you're the best storyteller in Texas. Who are some of your favorite storytellers?
I mentioned a while ago Charlie Wilson. Charlie
Oh.
Wilson, one time we were working on from East Texas. If you've never watched it, get the video, the Charlie Wilson's
I
War.
saw it.
It's about
Oh, that's a great movie.
And Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and Charlie Wilson. One time we were there was a bill had to do with abortion, and they were trying to reach a compromise. And Charlie Wilson said, "Look, when half the people think it's murder and half the people think it's liberty, you ain't going to settle it. Period." And you know, that was in 1980, and we're looking at 41 years later, and he was exactly right. You're not going to settle it. You know, you've got people split on it, and they can't afford to compromise. You know, you ask, would you compromise, you know, at 3 months or 2 months or 8 months or whatever? And both sides will tell you, we're not compromising under any conditions.
Hey, I'd like to bring Michael Rubin is one of my colleagues from St. Louis. Michael, do you have a question about storytelling for the Chancellor?
Yes, thanks, Jim. I do. So some donors respond to emotional stories. Other donors like to see the impact in statistics or spreadsheets of how their gift is going to make a difference. How do you adjust your storytelling to know the donor and know what moves that donor?
That is an excellent point and an excellent question. What you do is, first of all, you've been to see that donor enough that you know them. You have a feel of them, and you do both. When on Paul Foster, we had the picture of his granddaddy in the football uniform when he opened the book. Well, about 4 pages in, it showed how many more people could be, you know, could be helped with health care if he did. So we had emotion, but we also had statistics. And one of the things they did with that extra money in El Paso, they worked hard during the pandemic, and they worked hard to get vaccination, and they had the highest vaccination of any major city in the country. And that came from Paul Foster's, donation, and it wasn't a mandate or anything. They took some of that money, they advertised and encouraged people, and it worked.
Can we be philosophical for a moment? Chancellor, if you could travel back in time, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Ooh, I don't know. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've won some, I've lost some, and you go to specific things. But I think the thing always have courage to do what you're setting out to do. A lot of people give up early, and so always have courage, and then take care of details and be dependable.
Hmm.
One other word I'd use is anticipate.
Yeah.
You always anticipate what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
We were looking at a gift, probably $1 million in that range. And one of the ladies on the staff went with me to see these people. And the word was that these is a family, and the mother had died, and the dad remarried this young woman, and she was wanting his money in the will, and the kids were wanting the money, and they was all fighting each other.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's perfect, because she doesn't want those kids to win. They don't want her to win, so they just give the money to Texas Tech.
It sounds like a perfect solution.
Yeah, it's a perfect solution to me. Anyway, we went to see him and found out the young girl he married, she was 78. This old boy was 96.
Yeah.
And if I'm 96, 78 is a pretty young girl. And we met with them and talked about different issues, but that somebody had evidently tipped them that we were over there, and so some of the kids showed up, and there was a lot of hostilities. I told my associate, I said, we might as well leave this alone. We'll try to get something, but we're not going to get an answer out of these people that'll be satisfactory. But it's kind of funny. I thought they meant you married somebody who's 20 or 25. They married this young girl that she's 70, 76, something like that.
Yeah. We're summing up now.
And I've got to go to Carlsbad, New Mexico, to make a speech tonight, and tomorrow morning.
What story are you going to tell?
Well, it's an oil and gas group, and I'll probably have some oil and gas story to tell them. And they'll be a fun group. I'm talking to them in the morning. Vicki Hollop, who's the CEO and chairman of the board of Oxy, a major oil company, is the first woman that ever held a position like that. She's going to be on the program with me, and she's well qualified and does a great job, and was hired not because she was a woman, because she was most qualified. Yeah. She wasn't discriminated against because she was a woman. She was the door was open, and I tell my daughter, if she's a lawyer, and I said, when you get the law firm, if there's a good old boys network, figure it out and get to be president of it. Take it over.
Isn't there a lot of lawyers in the Hance family? Isn't your wife a lawyer?
My wife's a lawyer. My daughter is a lawyer. Her husband, my son-in-law, is a judge in Fort Worth. My son's a lawyer. He's a real estate developer, though. I've got another son-in-law.
Have you ever faced each other in a courtroom?
No. I keep telling my son-in-law I'm gonna do some case pro bono and come up to his courtroom and run him around, and he had one great story that he tells this summer. He's a criminal cases, Judge, and a guy came in his courtroom setting a bond. He's setting a bond on him, and the guy had another young man with him that had a T-shirt on it said "Wanted" in all 50 states. And so the judge sitting there looking at it, and he told the bailiff, "Go get that kid's driver's license number." And so he did, and they ran a check on it, and he wasn't wanted in all 50 states. He was wanted in one, though, and they arrested him in the courtroom.
Yep.
The moral of that story: don't wear a stupid T-shirt to the courthouse. You know, and it was pretty funny.
Chancellor, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah,
in this
thank you.
hour.
I enjoyed it.
And by the way,
wanna-
we give our audience the money back guarantee. Your chances of getting the gift go way up when you ask, you know, so, and, go ahead.
Jim, I was going to tell you that I appreciate the people that are listening, and the people that the American public is the most generous
Mhm.
country in the history
Correct.
of the world. And we give hundreds of billions of dollars. And so you are touching lives, and don't let up. Just keep on going. And remember this, every no is one no closer to the next yes.
Or maybe add a zero, right?
Yeah, just keep on adding those zeros.
Chancellor,
All
thank
right,
you.
Tony.
Not only your participation, but the amazing leadership you have provided so many people to make this a better country and a better world. Thank you. And as everyone could tell, he's going off somewhere. I don't see you slowing down at all. Thank you for the leadership and the inspiration that you provide to so many of us.
Thank you, Jim. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Who else? Michael's going to be a presenter. I forget. We got you in a couple of weeks. Who else? Al Hartman, are you there? Who else? Anybody else want to come on? Margie, it's nice. We've had several phone calls. I think this is the first time we could go eyeball to eyeball. Anybody else there? So thank you. And we got one next week I'm very excited about. It's an author of a best-selling book. It's called Cultivation, the Art and Science of Cultivation. And it's a book that's on the New York Times bestseller. It's been part of the Wall Street Journal Book of the Month. And his name is John Levy. So we're going to go from Dimmitt, Texas, where the Chancellor started his journey. And then we have someone from New York City. So everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. And we'll be back a week from now with John Levy talking about the power of cultivation. So everybody's earned an extra glass of their favorite wine, and we wish you the best. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the service you provide your communities and everybody else. And we'll see you a week from now. Good night.
Good night.
Judge.
Thanks.